So we're glad to have everybody, and I hope this is going to be an engaging conversation. We certainly have some great panelists today, and so let's get going. Just quick introductions. I'm Russell Stahl. I am hopefully in 3 days, a PhD candidate at um, at Clemson University in the Planning and Design in the Built Environment program. I was telling Katie that I'm in the middle of I picked up my comprehensive exam this morning, so if I look a little stressed, hang with me. I'm also a city council person for the city of Greenville at large, and I've been doing that I'm in my 7th year of serving the city. So let's get started. Why don't we do some introductions with maybe our panelists tell us a little bit about your career journey, where you got your planning degree, since we have a bunch of planners in the room, and how you got into climate planning for local government. So Matthew, why don't we start at the top? Why don't we start with you?
Sure. Thank you, Russell. Aloha. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Matt Gonser, and I currently serve as the Executive Director for the City and County of Honolulu's Mayor's Office of Climate Change, Sustainability, and Resiliency, which is a unique story in and of itself. Perhaps we can come back to it in terms of voter-initiated proposals and trying to validate that local democratic spirit and bring value to creating new government and new initiatives. But a little bit more about myself. I have a background in natural resources management, and after college landed in a small town community planning and development department, where on day 2, I believe, they gave me the zoning ordinance and said, read it. And that was a very quick intro into helping to bridge, quite frankly, what I knew from environmental sciences and how different rules, regulations, and things that we create are intended to achieve certain kinds of outcomes. A very unique experience being directly assigned and liaising with our local zoning board of appeals, where sometimes they would come to the agonizing conclusion of, we just have to approve something, which isn't inherently the point of appeals processes. But I was fortunate to have a boss who also had a background in landscape architecture, and he afforded opportunities to get involved in certain physical planning, in addition to some of our coastal consistency reviews out in Long Island. Smithtown was the town that I worked for. And long story short, that exposure to planning as a field, better understanding the ins and outs and how that has resulted in what we see outside our windows today in community, and what that means for what we're trying to accomplish moving forward, or what issues we're confronted with as a result of environmental management or mismanagement, and certainly growing climate change issues. I went to school for planning, so I'm a proud graduate, Master of Regional Planning from Cornell University's Department of City and Regional Planning. And through that experience, I got exposed to the Sea Grant College program, this nationwide state, university, and federal agency partnership with NOAA. Long story short, landed a unique opportunity with the University of Hawaii Sea Grant College program in a brand new role that they had focused on community planning and design, watershed management, the impacts to the nearshore environment as a result of what we do on land. And then if we have time, we can come back to sort of the origination of the office that I currently lead, but have been a staff member of for about 6.5 years at this point. So hopefully that's of interest, and happy to kick it back to you, Russell.
Perfect. The view out your window is a lot better than the view out of mine. So Chris, how about you?
Great, thanks, Russell, and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Chris Reed, and I'm the Sustainability Manager, the City of San Luis Obispo, which is on the central coast of California, about halfway between Los Angeles and San Francisco. Like most folks I know that do this work, my path here has been convoluted, circuitous, Byzantine, complicated, unexpected. I went to my undergrad degrees are in philosophy and sociology, and was really deeply interested in the way that people interact and intersect in our lives, how people's lives, as they're making meaning, are affected by the urban form they're in. And when I was in undergrad, Hurricane Katrina happened, which is this really profound event that was really sort of dramatic and was the clearest example of the sort of confluence of the social and the physical and the natural coming together and creating all these really diverse outcomes for a whole group of people. And so I went to pursue a PhD in sociology, University of Kansas. And about halfway, well, not halfway, a couple years into that, there was a National Science Foundation grant that the university won that convened professors across the campus to talk about the many nuances and different factors associated with climate change and climate action. So I was able to have some seminars that included biologists and climatologists and geologists, sure, but also historians and anthropologists and sociologists, and really understood sort of deep history and understanding of climate and how that's affected us as people, and why this particular moment is so unprecedented in human history. And so I was a couple of years into studying the confluence of social facts and disasters, and had not once heard about climate change in any of my studies, and just dawned on me that this was the work. It also dawned on me that researching how bad things are is pretty depressing, but I was able to take a little class that had a public local government component and a planning component, and was just really hooked on the feeling of being able to serve a community, to make material change, to take the bad news and to create policy options that folks like Russell can vote on and approve and benefit their community. So was able to come out to the Cal Poly San Luis Obispo campus and get a master's of city and regional planning there, and equally convoluted professional journey thereafter. But after being able to be lucky enough to work actually with Tammy for a while, supporting climate action across California, have worked in local government for close to a decade, 8 years now, and 6 years in my current position, and happy to talk more about that later.
So you're hopeful.
It's complicated, yeah.
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 Okay, good. All right, Tammy.
Thank you, Russell. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Tammy Seale. I'm an optimist and a planner. So I want to lead with that because I feel that being a climate action planner, really, I feel like you have to start with optimism. Yes, complicated. It's got a lot to it that can weigh you down at times, but I think that's a big part of who I am. So I grew up in a very small town in Northeast Florida, a beach community, a beautiful place. And I'm not going to kind of go into the how I grew up story, but it is pretty, it is part of why I became an environmentalist, an environmental planner, and a planner. I happened to grow up in a county that had a planned community happen there. And so I saw what happened with what was planned and what wasn't planned properly, and how that affected people and environment and opportunity. And it would shape who I became, though I didn't quite know it as I was growing up. I have a bachelor's degree in environmental conservation from the University of Colorado, and a Master of Science in Planning from Florida State University, where I focused on environmental planning and natural resource management. And I went into planning because it seemed to be the place where solutions happened. I had started an environmental work where we spent a lot of time debating issues, and some of the groups I was working with were taking positions on issues. But I found at the time that I was in the space, which was 30 years ago when I started, there weren't jobs like climate action planners. There were barely jobs for sustainability planners. You know, you had to go into planning to learn more about how resources were used, and why I found planning interesting is I really thought that that's where solutions were happening, where maybe we were meeting at compromise, but decisions were getting made that were in the interest of people, that were in the interest of the environment, and proper use of resources. So I've always worked at this intersection. It's sustainability to me. My path has started working for the state of Florida, where I spent 5 years doing work actually in local government interest, but from the state perspective, transitioned to California. I'm also in San Luis Obispo, and so I moved here with my partner 25 years ago. There were very few jobs when I came here, so I became a local government planner, and I took all the jobs nobody wanted. So all the special assignments, anything with environment, people were afraid of, I took those jobs and those opportunities. I worked in local government for about 10 years, and then I transitioned to being a consultant where I felt I could have more impact and more opportunity because I live in a small area and I wanted just more experience working with cities of all sizes and counties of all sizes. So I do work for a for-profit consulting company. However, we are fully employee owned and our work is in the public interest. And I'm happy to talk more about our projects as we get into this.
Yeah, Tammy, tell us a little bit more about PlaceWorks.
So PlaceWorks is a planning and design firm. We're based in California. We are spread across California, and our work, we provide kind of very traditional land use and environmental planning services, and not, I guess traditional isn't the right word. We're very collaborative and forward thinking. Our clients are cities, counties, regional planning agencies, the state. We also do work for private developers who have kind of goals and interests that align with our organization's vision and values. And we have about 150 employees across California. And I lead our climate action and resilience practice. So my day-to-day work is working on climate action, climate mitigation, and climate action planning across the state.
Perfect, thank you. We've seen a lot of changes in this world, in this profession over the last several years. What kind of changes have you seen in climate planning? And just jump in.
No one wants to go
Okay,
first.
I might call on somebody.
Well, I think the first thing is that it's a real discipline. I mean, 10 years ago, perhaps, when Chris was in college, it wasn't clearly, Chris would have to say that for himself, but I'm not sure everybody knew it was a career path 10 or 15 years ago. Yeah. So I think that's the biggest change, is that it exists and that it is work that, and as we've seen, my experience with it starting out maybe as a specialty or as a niche, and it's now, we're seeing a lot of local governments treat climate planning as good planning. And it's not in addition to, it's integrated into day-to-day planning and public works and all decisions across jurisdictions. We're not there everywhere yet, but I think we have really great examples. And that's one of the biggest changes I've seen, is it's interdisciplinary and interconnected.
Perfect.
Yeah,
And
just
that's
to add on to
what you
Tammy
think.
there. Yeah, to add on to Tammy there, Russell, I mean, it's unavoidable in a lot of respects, even with if you're talking affordability or housing, if we're not thinking about the future risks of inefficiencies, additionally burdening folks as we're trying to accelerate affordable housing. Like it's a whole package of, as Tammy noted, interwoven. And I wouldn't say even when I was a student some time ago that it was as interwoven. There was a lot of reasonable focus on hazard resilience, which we know, natural hazards is even itself kind of a misnomer in a lot of respects, as we have climate amplified, more intense, more frequent kinds of things, and our assessments need to look forward and not just historically at events, but certainly if we're not learning from those events, we're not practicing resilience ourselves. And there are so many community pressures, and it might feel sometimes, even in my short time here with the city, to mayoral administrations, not quite full on pendulum swings of priorities, but there are only so many things that can be all hands on deck for an administration or for the cabinet level. So it's trying to make sure that it is institutional in how we think through what it is that we're trying to deliver for and with community through a whole variety of issues here locally that we're grappling with in terms of affordability challenges, real climate impact challenges, housing development, reasonable, safe housing development, and then also hoping to realize the dreams of the commitments that we've made through our community plans around healthy, safe, thriving communities, and ensuring that we're not missing the opportunities to integrate those things that are also climate action and climate resilience when we're executing on that work.
Yeah, the only thing, a couple of things I'd add there, and this might just be from my personal vantage, because I know that there are some cities that have been doing this work for a really, really long time, but I think most of my colleagues, I think Matthew, a fellow Urban Sustainability Director network member, so we interact with other city staff all throughout the country, and there are a lot of us that are probably in offices that are less than 10 years old, and probably a lot less than 5 or even 3 years old. And one of the things that I've noticed that's really different is sort of the excitement of building something and of having ideas generated and creating this integrative approach is very different than managing and operating over time across city councils, across city managers, across community members, across governor's offices, across federal administrations. And I think one of the things that's been a unique challenge that we're excited to embrace, but is understanding how to continue to focus on the goals our council adopted, continue to focus on community benefit and public good, while also managing all that transition over time. And then also starting to have to really think about the operation and maintenance of those exciting projects that we built 10 years ago, and then now are coming up for critical maintenance or replacement.
Have you seen the role of a climate planner move from the basement of Public Works to more senior level parts within local governments?
I can jump in on this. So I, along with a dear colleague of ours from City of Santa Cruz, co-chair a group called the Green Cities California, which is a peer learning network of California cities. And we had this conversation just recently of sort of where folks are located in their cities. And I think it largely depends on where the topic or the office is in the sort of rise or fall of importance relative to the current administration. We've seen folks move from City Hall to Public Works to planning to their own departments back to City Hall. So I think really all over the place, and it really depends on the sort of focus of the city and the focus of that office.
Well, it sounds like it's a big deal in Honolulu.
Yeah, from our perspective, as I mentioned, there was a ballot initiative. So every 10 years, there's a much more formal process to propose and put questions to the voters to amend our city charter. And in the 2016 election, which certainly had a whole variety of other consequences in terms of national, state, and local leadership on climate issues, the question was, should we, the city and county of Honolulu, create an Office of Climate Change, Sustainability, Resiliency, where we are structured in the mayor's office, the mayor and the managing director's office. Certainly, we all know that there's different structures of local government in terms of the council and mayor relationships, and that is a learning curve that really you can't learn unless you're in it, probably. And overwhelmingly at that time, the voters stood up and said yes, because they recognized they had seen, changes over the last century, long relationships with place, and there was a desire to bring more focused attention and resources. But I'll admit, when that first draft question came out maybe a year before, because it's a bit of a 2 to almost maybe more like a 1.5-year process of vetting questions. This charter commission has public processes for whittling it down. I was biased. I was like, I really think our planning department should be doing this work more and better. And I almost, for about 30 seconds in my head, wasn't going to vote for it. But, I came around over time because to Chris's point, you have to gain momentum when there is, and though there is a moment, even for us now, we're not in growing pains, but it's what is our role and function at this point in time, 7 years on since the establishment of the office. And I'm fortunate that I was one of the first program managers focused on our adaptation portfolio of work. And I've had to think through that and think through how to support the team, resource the team, share those lessons from the previous administration to help ensure that we're effective and impactful in carrying forward the work. Not all of us are like the city and county of Denver, where they had a different voter initiative that now generates about $40 million for that office to do amazing climate action and adaptation work. That's maybe an outlier in terms of the ability to really drive the mission and drive the impact and benefit. But to Chris's point, it's very variable in terms of the structure and the age and sort of the trajectory of this kind of work in local government. We're about an office of 20 at this point, but we have counterparts to Chris's note on the Urban Sustainability Directors Network, where it's a person, and they're just, they're not overwhelmed, but they're able to work differently and nimbly within their own structure to develop those partnerships. But we're really trying to make sure that it's not people dependent and make sure that the processes help set us up for the success moving forward.
Let's talk a little bit more about those partnerships. How important, or is that changing? How important are partnerships in what y'all are doing every day? And with whom? Tammy, I think I know your answer.
Well, I have all different answers depending on where I'm working, but I was hoping Chris would talk about the partnerships here that the city's
Sure.
developed, because I talk about them when I'm out in the world. So I think
Yeah. Well, yeah, and I'm interested to hear what you have to say about how you see other cities engaging in different ways. But first of all, I think our goal on climate action and climate resilience is to reduce our emissions to carbon neutral. So there's a spreadsheet that shows how we get to zero, and we're following that dutifully. But really, that's a co-benefit to the direct benefit of the work, which is decreasing the cost of energy, increasing mobility and access to resources, making our town more beautiful and joyful and accessible. And so all that depends deeply on our relationships with our community. And we're really fortunate. Like one that comes to mind that's going to be surprising to a lot of folks on this call, if you've dealt with the national version of this organization, is that we have a very close relationship with our Chamber of Commerce, who is broadly supportive of our work, and we nurture that relationship closely. We've also invested a ton of time, like many offices throughout the US and North America. We really understand how the work we're doing is the systems we inhabit are rooted sort of in the deep injustices that our country has perpetrated over its history, and so understand that there's a real role that we can play in addressing equity, racial, environmental justice issues. So we've invested a lot of time in working with our equity organizations and tribal communities to make sure that they're centered in the work, and that we're not just meeting with them so that they support us, but rather are understanding what their core needs are and how they're currently going unmet, and then looking for a Venn diagram where the work we're doing can reduce emissions, create broader community resilience, but also overlap with their specific needs. And in doing that, we've developed a ton of trust across those organizations between each other, have found way better ways to serve our community. And the sort of upshot is that there's much broader general support for our work. And so it's been critically important for the ongoing success that we invest in those relationships. And it's also just personally is very sustaining in work that can be quite challenging.
Well, and what about the role of the public? How do you engage the public and educate the public?
And maybe from Honolulu now. So, I mean, even capital P, lower P, public, capital C, lower C, community, it's not all the same audience. And we sometimes are challenged because a lot of our, at least foundational work, really is island-wide. So the city and county of Honolulu is the island of Oahu. The mayor is the mayor for the whole of the island. And there's a need for whole of community approaches, but we also know oftentimes you can't get people excited until there's a physical thing that they see outside their route to work or getting to school that gets them jazzed or frustrated. So even for us, we are constantly assessing our practices in terms of who we are connecting with, and most importantly, who we are whom we have been unable to connect with. And we've actually slowed down certain planning initiatives to assess where we were, looking at certain socio-demographic questions to then be like, okay, we have clear geographic and age and other demographic gaps. How do we make sure that we take the time to connect with those people that, frankly, we know, to Chris's point, in terms of conditions that have resulted in vulnerabilities, we need to provide service to first and foremost. So even for us now, with the great benefit of the Inflation Reduction Act and the environmental planning, the EPA's climate pollution reduction grant monies, we are endeavoring to do something we haven't done before, which is, quite frankly, just pay directly community-based organizations through a very official and legal contracting process, which has taken us a long time within City Hall to navigate and figure out, but we also don't know if it'll be successful. And as much as that's a risk for us, it's a potential risk for community leaders too. And we have to be, I think, open to sharing all the ups and downs while making sure that we're just trying to be genuine in what it is that we're trying to advance. Because more often than not, it really is about that climate success on climate action or climate resiliency is usually a co-benefit of some other thing that is much more resonant with people's day-to-day lives, to Chris's comments before. My other note on partnerships, you know, we're a small state. We only have 4 counties. Where we can, we try to leverage opportunities for sharing our voice in statewide legislative processes that will help materialize the benefits of things that we're working on that really are the state's kuleana or responsibility to advance. So really leaning on our local government partners too.
And Chris and Tammy, California is a little bit different as far as size. How are you all engaged in state level legislation?
I can talk, my role is different from a city staff person's role, very likely. I mean, my big thing is that I provide capacity to local governments to help them address the newer rules that come out of our capital every year. So the biggest probably challenge to climate planning in California is that we do have a regulatory framework for it on the mitigation, the GHG reduction side, as well as the climate adaptation side. And it's in different planning processes, and it's a little complicated, and it's very technical. So my role is to help translate that to local governments. I have worked with the state of California to provide guidance documents, one of them being the California Adaptation Planning Guide that I worked with a consultant team with community-based organization partners just to try to, make it work. How do we take these state rules and make them make sense in all types of communities, under-resourced, highly resourced, small, large, rural, urban? How do we make sure we're thinking about good planning as we're doing the work? So I don't get involved generally on an advocacy side or a lobbyist side, but I do kind of help to make sure I provide capacity. I did want to just kind of go back to the community outreach if I could, and just kind of lift up the comments and say, you've got 2 great examples here. And we have communities represented with Chris and Matt that have provided resources to these programs, which means there's resources to technical work and also outreach. And it took many, many years. I watched it happen in San Luis Obispo for that allocation to get right-sided, for there to be priority given to communication and outreach in partnership with another group we have called the Climate Coalition, or that's their short name. So in some cases, you know, the city here had to rely on community partners to do some of the outreach before there were adequate resources in City Hall for staff to do some of that outreach. I hope that's fair representation, Chris. That has been my perspective as a citizen in the city. And that's what we see in other places too, is that where local governments aren't able to do outreach, there are community-based organizations that can fill this need. And they're generally, you know, as Matt was getting at, they're trusted partners. They can tap into frontline communities, to folks who have been hard to reach or traditionally not engaged for various reasons into government decision making. So what I'm seeing as a change in climate action planning in California and in outreach is this more authentic and community-driven engagement. And so as a consultant, I am doing these community-based organization contracts where we work with a public agency and we work with community organizations and turn over a big part of the outreach to the community organizations. We compensate them for that work, and we highly value and prioritize that local knowledge and that experience and bring it forward to the process. Processes will vary around the state, but I think this is something we're trying to do in all types of planning. But in particular, I think it's really made a difference in getting meaningful strategies into climate action and adaptation plans that people identify with, they value, they prioritize, and will be part of implementing those. So there's probably a lot more we could all say about community-based participation, but I do think that that's been a pivotal change in planning and climate action planning and where I'm working. And I'll turn it back over to others to answer your question about the legislation.
Well, I want you to look back a little bit, maybe put on your backpack, and we have a lot of students that are here with us this afternoon. Think back to planning school, and what did you did planning school prepare you for the job you have?
The job I'm in now doesn't prepare me for the job I'm in now.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a real important recognition that, you know, if it's a 2-year planning program, there is only so much exposure you can get, and there's only so much you can try to absorb, take on, and connect with others. It's essential to get outside of the department and the program and find opportunities, whether it's, you know, competitions that require interdisciplinary teams. I was in school for too long because I also got a master's in landscape architecture, so that obligated a fair amount of different department engagement and afforded me what I was also interested in, which is, you know, the ability to speak intelligibly with those that do the physical things that we see out in community, and how are the rules that help set up or at least ensure a base default of good performance on the kinds of things that we're designing around urban forestry or stormwater management, et cetera. So yeah, again, that's kind of my main encouragement, is just to ensure that you're connecting with others that work in different fields that you will have to work with once you're out in the planning profession. You know, whether you're in a role like Tammy or potentially on the quote unquote client side at the local government, having the ability to interact with different audiences and sort of speak multiple languages in terms of the work is really important. And just ensuring that we keep thinking about the people, because these are really human issues, and we need to talk about it as humans as well, and make it relevant and resonant in terms of what it is that we're trying to achieve in terms of benefit for people. Hopefully not just always preparing for the worst, but really making meaningful community environmental improvement in the near term too.
And what are some of the most important skills coming out of that you got coming out of planning school? or didn't get maybe? Chris, let me throw that one to you.
Sure. Well, sounds like Matthew. I also have a second master's of a partner who's very supportive of me spending most of my 20s going to school. My other degree is in sociology, my other master's degree in sociology. So had a lot of time in the library and reading and writing on people and how people are interact with each other and how systems of power and systems of meaning emerge out of those interactions. And so when I came to grad school, the theory class, I was like the one weirdo in theory class, was like, this is great. We should do more of this. And everyone's like, no. But actually, that was one of the greatest pieces of value, was taking the sort of theoretical relational stuff and applying it to the specific systems that exist in cities and the specific like processes and understanding the like power dynamics and relationships between organizations and a city and how folks are elected and what their electoral power means and has transitioned into votes, and just like thinking about the space we're in, but then also having the like background to like really continually ask like, what is this job? Like, what is the point of an office of sustainability? What is it that we're actually doing? Why is it worth investing in us instead of if resources are thin, instead of maintaining a park or hiring another police officer, why invest in us? I actually don't think that that's a false choice. Or I do think it's a false choice. You can do both, but point taken. So like the skills that came out of it for me, like, you know, y'all can find spaces to get good at Excel or Microsoft Word or write a report. Taking on all kinds of random tasks like Tammy talked about was also my strategy. And that's really where I got the sort of like mechanical skill sets that have contributed to, I think, our success. But for me in grad school, it was really the opportunity that affords to step back and look at the big picture and really ground or really understand how the day-to-day work sits against that big picture, and what we're doing was really profound for me.
Perfect. What advice would you give students that are getting ready to graduate that want to get into this field?
Be open to opportunity. It's going to be really scary to make a decision on a first move, but first moves, whether it's like a literal move to some other location, but in terms of a first move, in terms of a position or a role or a job, it's not likely to be your last. And it's important to think about what it is that you hope to give, but also get out of an experience, and think about those trajectories and what you might want to do moving forward. I can't say that's exactly the intentionality that I approached it. I was a little bit more opportunistic of positions that never existed before. I can't say that's always going to be the option in front of you, but even that was a big leap of faith and a risk for myself, and really just ensuring that you stay connected with each other as well, certainly in the early days post-graduation, and that is your network. You know, there are people that I don't connect with regularly enough, but definitely people that I can just reach out to at any moment to gauge where they are in their careers and their roles, and bounce ideas off of.
Tammy, describe an ideal candidate that wants to get into consulting.
Oh, you cut out for a minute, but are you asking me to describe
what is an ideal candidate coming out of graduate school?
A highly motivated, curious person. I mean, that's just like, for me, that's really, I'm looking for someone I enjoy spending time with. We work pretty intensely together on our team. And so I need somebody in consulting. You do have to work independently a lot. You have to work in teams. You have to work with all kinds of personalities. And so you perhaps, I mean, we do that everywhere, right? But I have perhaps a dozen or more clients at a time. My clients change every year. So I have to, you know, to be a successful consultant, you do need to be motivated, because you have to find your path in a project or a team. You have to help get more work. I mean, I have to convince people to hire me. So, and I lose about a third of the, you know, more than I say I win maybe a quarter of the time. So it's good to have thick skin when you're a consultant. You don't get to do everything you want because you have to sell yourself. But when you do get the projects, you have to be excellent. And so there is a high bar for our work. So I am looking for those types of people in general. I prioritize hiring people with planning degrees. I feel like when you're out there applying for climate jobs, you sell that planning degree, because I can tell you right now that it is highly valuable. Your interdisciplinary education, the methods foundation that you have, as you heard from Chris and Matt, it does translate, and planners are great. It's called climate action planning. While there are plenty of people in the space who don't have planning degrees, I think planning students are very well suited for this career. I'm also looking for people with strong quantitative skills. The work is science-based. So you have to like science and reading and be a bit of a nerd and be able then to make that transition to the system. How do all the pieces fit together? How do we define a problem and turn it into policy? So critical thinking is what I'm looking for in writing skills. So I am looking for all of it, but really, I think I start with the personality, the good fit, and the curiosity. When you're in this work, you are never standing still. It is changing. Everything changes on us every day. And everything, like I said, I've been doing planning for 30 years. I have to stay up with all the research. Just like most people probably in academia, like every week or every month, I've got a list of journals, articles, and white papers and legislation and all kinds of best practice stuff to go through. So, right, Chris and Matt, you have to stay up with it. It's a very dynamic practice.
And we have a question from the audience about, I guess to you, Tammy. Can you speak more about the process of bidding for work as a consultant?
So that is something that's a little different, where Chris and Matt get to shape the project and develop how it will work. I'm reacting to what municipal staff have decided the project will be. So sometimes I get to work with cities or counties to shape projects or write grant applications, but generally my work is to respond to what's called requests for proposals. So a city staff will release this out to consultants. I review several of these every week, and then I identify which ones would be a good fit for my team and my firm. So we make sure we have enough people, we have the expertise, we like the community's values, we feel aligned with where they're going. And then we put together what we call a proposal. So I have to go in and take how a city staff person or a county staff person has scoped out a project and look at all the tasks and figure out how many hours they're going to take and who on my team is going to do them and how many, months or years it will take to do the project. Translate those hours into dollars and put it in a really nice package that really promotes my team without being too arrogant. And, in a nice way that talks about all of our qualifications, all the great work we've done, all the happy clients we have, and send this out. And the one thing about this is hard is you get excited every time you scope a project. I have to believe I'm going to do the work. I have to see myself being successful and happy doing that project. So I put it out there for agency staff to respond to, and I compete. Sometimes I compete with 2 firms, 10, 20. There's a lot of competition these days. And then if we're fortunate, we may get to the list to get interviewed. And that's a lot of work to prepare for that. And then, the interview process will then allow the agency staff person to pick one team. I'm disappointed every time we lose. But that's something I've opted into because I believe in the work. And that is the one challenge of being a consultant, is you learn how to lose. Our work is judged all the time. We have to learn how to communicate with all different types of people, and we have to be able to move on when we're not picked to be that team. But there's plenty of work. Unfortunately, I shouldn't be too gleeful when I say that, But unfortunately, there's a lot of climate work and really good planning work out there. And so we turn to the next project to bid on it. But
Great, thank
I
you.
enjoy
And
it.
Russell, if I may, on just
Yeah.
on that topic, certainly, from the local government, quote unquote, client side, it's a real challenge. I mean, frankly, even the thought that a local government knows exactly how to scope what it is that it's asking for, when oftentimes it's something we've never done before, there's no precedent. We can learn from other jurisdictions' RFPs or the contracts that they have. It's fortunate that all of that, is public information, and we can readily glean lessons and learnings. But it can become, it's a negotiation, even in the period of solicitation, right? If we don't write something clear enough, that's going to beg a lot of questions, because to Tammy's point, they need to be very thoughtful about the resourcing, the time, how to budget and price that out. Sometimes it can unfortunately maybe lock you into, we only said we were going to do X number of engagements. Well, we know it's nearly impossible to, a year and a half before you hope to do a project, know how many kinds of engagements and activities that you're going to do. So it's an art. I wouldn't say all local governments are good at it. And it's a thing we try to connect with others. If we get inspired because we saw something that seemed really great in another jurisdiction, I'll reach out to try to see what that is. But even from the excitement to frustration spectrum, local government, you're not always going to get the resources to try to do what it is that you want to do. So our planning department is trying to think through what are smaller scale special area plans, and they might go 2, 3, 4 budget cycles, and then all of a sudden there's money to do a thing, and maybe that person whose idea it was isn't there anymore, and now we're constantly trying to iterate and learn to deliver and evolve with the field and the needs as well. So that I just wanted to add that for a little bit of additional perspective. And to Tammy's point, there is a lot of work and opportunity. There's a fair amount of federal resources, primarily on the climate action side right now. Something that we've, a last note, grappled with are what are things that perhaps we really should just be doing ourselves. And it's not a critique per se on the deliverable from the client side, but because it can be such a challenge to sync up the timing on the funding, navigating through our own procurement processes, it could be a year of that effort when we could have been perhaps working on it or advancing aspects of it. So it really is iterative. It's an internal negotiation. It ultimately becomes a negotiation on the contract side. And then even throughout a project, you're adjusting and pivoting within reason, scope, and budget to effectuate a good outcome.
Perfect. And we are quickly running out of time, and I want to leave a little bit of time for some questions. But I'd like for each of you give us one sage piece of wisdom for students. What advice would you give someone who's getting ready to graduate from graduate school?
Well, I'm going to build on what Tammy was talking about regarding the constant learning. We unfortunately are the experts in the world on 3 or 4 topics because they are emergent topics that no one else has researched before. That's wild. We should not be the experts, but we are because we've dug deep into it. So my sage advice, and related to that, the last 2 people we hired are incredible people. And when we always have an interview question that asks, what's the last thing you've read or what's something you're excited about? Just so happens those 2 people were overflowing with examples and couldn't even decide on which thing they were so excited to talk about. And so this commitment to continued learning, to continued reading, to continued development of skill sets, but just understanding the world around you will always serve you well and will always make you competitive for the work you're looking to do.
Super. Matthew, what about you?
I really appreciated Tammy's comments on, what a good candidate would be. Curiosity, have confidence in what you want and can contribute. Be open to hearing from others, right? My form of environmentalism is like critiquing what we see out there, But that critique also is gained through experience in hearing others' rationale or understanding as to like, this is how it's become to be, this is how we're trying to overcome that issue, and just being open to explore and push even those that you're trying to manage up to, but respectfully and open to receiving back critique to yourself and greater comprehension as to how you're working within a system as you're also trying to overturn a system sometimes.
And finally, Tammy, what is the bumper sticker of wisdom?
Oh, I'm not sure I'm the right person for a short bumper sticker. But I fully support Matt and Chris as well. And I guess it's, to me, now that I'm closer to the end of my career than to the beginning, I often reflect on what would I have done differently, if anything. What do I wish I knew that maybe I learned along the way? And the thing is I had to learn what I didn't know along the way. You know, I had to be open to the journey. That's just so important. And now when I talk with students, I do encourage people to really dig into how they learn and communicate. All this other stuff we said is important and really critical as well. You have to have technical knowledge, but I think to be successful in collaboration and the negotiations that will happen with your coworkers, with your community members, your clients, is understanding more about where you're at in communicating, how you learn. Are you, some people talk about is, do you have to write the notes? Do you type the notes? Are you a verbal person, a visual person? But creating and working in the space, coming into situations with empathy and understanding. Because once you understand more about how you learn and communicate, you will become more open to how other people do and be more aware and accepting of these diverse approaches that people bring. And that we're all coming into rooms with different motivations, oftentimes different knowledge, fears and concerns. And we all work at the end, in this great space of uncertainty. So that to me is more of a softer skill, but it's a critical one. Communication is the one thing I think most of us weren't taught in planning school, and we've had to learn it along the way.
Tammy, if you think about how you learn here, you think about what you're learning here, there's also who you're learning along with. And the last thing I would give a huge recommendation for is investing in your network in this space. And when I was young, I thought the idea of networking was like this cynical ploy to advance yourself based on fake relationships. And what I love about this job and this profession, maybe more than anything, is that the people that I do this work with in my community, but also in California and in North America, are some of the most amazing and like beautiful people in the world. And I'm so grateful to spend my career with them. And because we're all learning at the same time, they're also huge resources to be able to get work done and huge peers of support. So investing early and steadily and continually in that network is extremely valuable time spent.
Perfect. All right. Well, thank you all very much. And we have a few minutes for questions. Katie, I don't know if you want to do that through chat or what?
Sure. Yeah, if there's any additional questions that people want to throw in the chat, or feel free to unmute yourself. You all should have the ability to do so. Feel free to throw them out to our presenters. We've got just a few more minutes of their time. Professor Shai, it looks like you guys have a classroom question.
Hello, I don't know if you can see me, but my name is Jacob Duffels. We're here at Cornell University taking a climate adaptation, urban communities adaptation to climate change. Butchered the name, but yes, it's a city and regional planning class here. Professor Linda Shai has been amazing this semester, teaching us about the ins and outs of urban adaptation to climate change in different contexts and communities. I was wondering if anyone on the panel is capable of answering sort of what has been, if any, interaction or engagement with traditional ecological knowledge participants, namely Indigenous community members and their involvement in some of the regional planning or climate resilience strategies that you guys have been focusing on, and how heavy of a role do they play, and what do you think is maybe like their potential involvement in future strategies and actions?
I know we're running low on time. I'll try to offer very quickly that subject bridges both of our climate action and our climate adaptation efforts. And frankly, when we were coming forth with the city's first ever climate action plan at City Council in 2021, we had someone that we knew and had a good relationship with basically testify in opposition to adopting the plan because it didn't incorporate certain land management practices and things that really now are, quite frankly, much more prominent and were always intended to be part of our climate adaptation efforts, but perhaps we hadn't really communicated that sort of thought in the steps over time. We made a concerted effort to bring resources to those local community-based organizations that do Malama Aina and within their mission and their care for the place and the land to help us better understand and connect with their community members that they serve. And right now, through a different EPA environmental justice government-to-government grant, we're actually paying directly what we call climate champions, where these 6 community-based organizations now can much more intentionally elevate, a summer-based intern or fellow, however they like to determine it, to do something that is clearly a priority and aligned with the mission of that organization. But we're also helping them see that that work is part of the climate adaptation strategy, and not to claim their effort, but to help even bridge what sometimes maybe is semantics within the work that we're trying to accomplish. So we could certainly talk a lot more about it, but that's maybe just a quick overview from Honolulu's perspective.
Yeah, right. This could be a whole other panel. It's a great question and one that deserves a tremendous amount of time and attention. And so the short answer is yes, we work closely with our tribal partners and integrate TK into what we do.
Perfect. Any other questions? All right, Katie, I'll turn it back to you.
Okay. Thank you guys so much for your participation. I know that I learned a lot in this session, and I'm sure all of our participants did as well. I will be sending out a follow-up survey. If you guys could just take a couple of minutes to fill that out, it'll help us structure this panel series if we are to do it again in the future, and just know what individuals learned. Thanks again to all of our panelists for their great participation and insight into what pursuing their career looks like in this space. And this recording will also be posted on the Association for Collegiate Schools of Planning website in case you want to return to it for any reason. And I hope you all have a great rest of your day.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks to ACSP.